Good evening and welcome to the May 6th edition of Beyond the Headlines. My name is Colin Dowe and I'll be serving as your host this evening. I first of all would want to start off by saying thank you so very much for joining us via GBN Television, GBN Radio, or any of our social media platforms. You're the ones that make the program. You're the ones that have it interesting. You're the ones that keep us motivated in producing what was the award-winning magazine show for 2023. This evening we're taking a look at the new National Party. We'll be looking at its overall health as well as its readiness to govern. Two gentlemen will be joining me, both online. One is already with us, the second will be joining. So we anticipate Mr. Peter Wickham, who is a political analyst and pollster, regionally renowned, will be joining us later on in the program, but we do have with us online Mr. Anthony Boatswain. Good evening and welcome, sir.
Good evening, Colin. It's my pleasure to be on your program.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. And as is signal, both Mr. Boatswain and Mr. Wickham, when he joins, are independent commentators looking at the theme as being discussed. So none would be representing a political party and certainly not the New National Party. Am I getting that right, Mr. Boatswain?
You are correct. You are correct. I'm here in my personal capacity, although I've been a member of the New National Party for over 25 years, but I am speaking to you now on this program as an independent person and not representing the New National Party in any form whatsoever.
Okay, and let's just use that 25-year experience, and if you can share with us some of the history of the New National Party as an organization. So when it was formed, what brought about the formation, that type of thing.
Very interesting, Colin. And to look at the New National Party, its formation and its existence to this date, we have to go back to the year 1984. And prior to that, we had the People's Revolutionary Government that governed the affairs of Grenada from 1979 to 1983, October 1983. When the PLG imploded, it created a vacuum, a political vacuum, in the sense that the two parties that pre-existed the PLG, the GOLP and the GNP, were no longer considered as viable political organization, except the GOLP was still, I must say, relatively strong. But it really created the avenue for new political organizations to emerge. And in that context, between the end of the PLG and during the period of the interim administration, a number of political organizations came to the fore. You had a political organization known as the GDM, Grenada Democratic Movement, which was headed by Dr. Francis Alexis and included persons like Dr. Kit Mitchell. Then you had another party headed by Winston White, the CDLP, Christian Democratic Labour Party, that was already in existence. And then you had a new organization formed that was known as the National Democratic Party, the NDP. The NDP came into existence as a result of a number of young, aspiring intellectuals being desirous of getting involved in the political arena. And you had people like myself, Desmond Latouche, Mark Isaac, Oliver Joseph, Terence Moore. We came together and we decided that we want to be involved in the political field, and therefore we decided to approach George Brizan, who was then an education officer. And we went to him in the ministry. The ministry was at the drill yard at the time. And we told him that we believe that he's the right person to lead a political movement. After some thought, he decided, yes, he will accept it. And then other members came through. We had people like Finsley St. Louis, um, Colin Andrew, Soka Boka Grant, and we formed what was called the National Democratic Party. And George Brizan became the leader of that party. So in essence, you had post-revolution 4 political parties. The threat and the fear then was that if there was to be another general election, the GULP could emerge. And therefore, the thinking then was that there should be a unified political force to fight the GULP. And therefore, the 4 parties, the leadership of the 4 parties went to Union Island, and under the tutelage of Sir James Mitchell, they formed what was then called the New National Party. So the New National Party really was the result of the merging of 4 existing political organizations in Grenada. In 1984, in the general elections in December, the New National Party won 14 of the 15 seats that were contested. The only seat that the NNP did not win was the St. Andrew Northeast, where the GULP took that seat. But GULP was still a force to be reckoned with, because as you may recall, in the subsequent election in 1990, GULP emerged with 4 seats. But let us go back to the GNP. To the GNP. The GNP, the leader was Herbert Blaise. It was decided that Herbert Blaise, the senior politician, should lead that coalition party, and Herbert Blaise became the political leader and then Prime Minister of Grenada for a time. However, GNP did not last very long. And again, different persons have different perspectives as to exactly why the NNP did not last very long. But certain factions within the party decided that they were not happy with the policies of Herbert Blaise with respect to retrenchment of workers at the time. And therefore, they used that as a pretext to leave the party. So we had people like Vincent Louis Living, then followed by people like Kerry Lansing, and then Francis Alexis and George Brizan. They all left the GNP. And they formed what they called the NDC. So that was how the NDC came into being. So in essence, everybody now who was once members of the NNP can now say that they are now NDC. But remember, NNP was the tree. And the NDC, TNP, and other parties were what we call the branches. So when that happened, they formed the NDC. Blaise remained with the NNP. People like Dr. Mitchell remained with Blaise with the NNP. And then they had a convention, I think in 1988 or 89. And Dr. Mitchell contested the leadership of the party, much to the chagrin and the surprise of Blaise supporters. And he won. The GNP element were not happy with what happened. So Blaise decided that they will form their own party and leave Kit Mitchell with the NNP. So they formed what they call the TNP. So now you see what was happening. You had the NDC, TNP, the old NNP. And in the 1990 elections, the NDC won 7 of the 15 seats with Mr. Brafitt as the leader of the party. Apparently, we had a problem where with Kit Mitchell, not Kit Mitchell, but with Brizan, Alexis, they decided to have a compromise leader, and they elected Brafitt to lead the party. Mr. Brafitt did not last very long as leader of the NDC, and he gave the party over to Brizan, and Brizan himself did not last very long. But what was instructive with the NNP was that NNP won 2 seats in 1990, Dr. Mitchell's seat and the St. Mark's seat, which Malcolm Antoine won. So everybody thought then that that was the end of the New National Party. There was also a challenge to Dr. Mitchell's leadership by a group within the NNP known as the A-Team. And I remember that at the convention in McDonald College, they moved to overthrow or to take over the leadership of the NNP from Dr. Mitchell, but that did not happen. So in essence, from 1989 to present, NNP has had only one political leader, Dr. Kit Mitchell. And this dominance of Dr. Mitchell over the party can be responsible for what some people believe is the longevity of the party. That in the sense that you had one leader, the dominant leader, a strong leader, and the people voted NNP on 4 out of 5 occasions in subsequent elections. And on 3 of those occasions, the NNP won by a clean sweep. I happen to be part of that because I joined the NNP in 1997 and contested my first election in 1999. So you can see that the history of NNP is a bit factitious in the sense that it was born out of turmoil, I will say. But yet, because of the dominance of one leader, it survived the test of times.
Okay.
But at present, you can say that we have to look at maybe the end of that dominance because of what most people believe they're experiencing or they have experienced political fatigue or NNP fatigue.
All right, we'll come to the present, but let me just welcome Mr. Peter Wickham. Peter, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure having you to discuss politics in Grenada, of course, zooming in on the health and of the NNP and its readiness for governance. Good evening to you. You seem to be muted.
Yeah, sorry. I was saying good evening and good. It's good to be with you on this program, Beyond the Headlines again. Thank you.
Wonderful. It's a pleasure having you. We are getting some historical background from Mr. Boatswain on the New National Party. And let me just ask you, just from a regional perspective, as we try to put the whole conversation in context, are political parties strong, independent organizations, or are they really election facilitation bodies?
What's a strong independent organization? I'm not really sure. Political parties, my definition of political parties that I would have had from my political science studies tells me that a political party is an agency that is designed, or an organization is designed to contest and win elections. If it's not that, it's a pressure group. So the idea of a political party existing for a reason other than to win elections is essentially it's not a political party. So to that extent, one could say, of course, the NNP is the consummate political party in Grenada because it has won more elections than anything else, than any other political organization. So to that extent, it's a pretty solid political organization. The whole matter of the leadership, which is what I think that ultimately you're getting to, is also an interesting one because generally speaking, in the Caribbean, strong political parties are defined as organizations that have strong leadership. Generally speaking, there's a direct relationship between a strong leader, a good leader, and essentially a party that can win elections. You've seen it in Grenada is certainly an outstanding example. We've seen it in St. Kitts and Nevis, under Denzel Douglas. You've seen it in Gonzalez in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who has won 5 elections back to back. Owen Arthur in Barbados, and in the old days, you would had Arrow and currently Mia Motley again. So yeah, usually there's a direct correlation between a strong leader and the success at the election, at the polls. But success at the polls for a political party is nothing to run away from because ultimately that's why you exist. You exist to win elections.
Okay. Just share with us a little bit in terms of your perspective, because as you would have defined, successful political parties being defined by the winning of elections leads back to a strong leader. Do we see examples where there's I'll use the term softly, not as powerful a leader, but a strong organization and backing based on philosophical ideas that have been able to win elections? And I'm going to try, if I draw a parallel of, let's say, the US, if you think generally of the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, there's some philosophical differences that seem to drum up support. Is that the Caribbean example, or does the party rise and fall depending on the leader?
No, I laugh when you said it, because I thought that certainly the historical analysis by Mr. Boatswain would have essentially put all of that in perspective. Philosophically, there's no difference between the two political agencies, the two political parties in Grenada. And I would go as far as to say that across the Caribbean, you run into the same situation where the political entities, political organizations are ultimately the same. So, no, I don't really see the difference. You know, I've heard people suggest that one is slightly more radical than the other, but the reality is that there's no difference. In Barbados, we have two Labour parties. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I guess there are some nuances that you will see between the Unity Labour Party and the NDP, but ultimately the two parties are the same. And what often happens, which is interesting, is that you have a change of government and any policies fundamentally continue under the new leadership. So I struggle to see the difference. Usually the parties, their personality differences, and one usually has a strong leader, and ultimately that's what defines it. Look at St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you know. Why would, under normal circumstances, why would an NDP not be able to have been successful over the last 5 years, 5 terms? So you're looking at a 25-year stretch where one political organization has been in power. You have a strong leader, which is Dr. Gonzalez, and he towers over both Mr. Friday and the gentleman that preceded him. So that really is what it's all about. It's about leadership. The issue, though, which is the elephant in the room here, and I'm anxious to hear my colleague respond to it, is leaders get tired and people get tired of leaders. And, you know, there is no question in my mind that Dr. Mitchell is a brilliant leader. And indeed, Dr. Mitchell stands alone regionally in many regards. He does have personal records in terms of victories, in terms of clean sweeps. And he stands in among the greats, you know, with Dr. Denzel Douglas and Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, with Owen Arthur in Barbados. He stands among the greats. The final analysis is that, you know, even the great leaders get beaten because people get tired of them. And it was interesting that in Grenada, you've had 2 opportunities to share your exhaustion with Dr. Mitchell. In Barbados, Owen Arthur was beaten by David Thompson in 2008, which, you know, it was clear that people were tired of him by then. And then he was beaten by Frondell Stewart. And Frondell Stewart and Tillman Thomas have a lot in common in that they are easily among the weakest leaders that we've had in the Caribbean. To be beaten by Tillman Thomas, it says a lot. And I think what it is really saying is that it's not that people necessarily have an issue with Dr. Mitchell. I think that people are just tired and they're looking for something different. Clearly, Tillman Thompson filled their eyes. The Grenadians are not looking again. And that really is what it comes back to. That, to me, is the issue that we need to be discussing.
So political fatigue as well as population fatigue, Mr. Boatswain. How do you comment on these? Is Dr. Mitchell, you believe, in terms of the leadership and drive for the NNP getting tired, one? And secondly, do you believe that the Grenadian population has had enough of a Dr. Mitchell-led NNP?
Well, yes, to some extent. But I want to agree with my colleague here that Caribbean politics, and even Grenada, is one of personality politics, and not so much in terms of differences of economic and social policies. For me, they are all the same in terms of economic policies, the social policies. But what makes a difference is that cult of leadership, that people tend to gravitate around a certain leader, the charismatic leader, and that is really the dominance of our politics. That has happened in Grenada under Dr. Mitchell. It happened under the GULP. I know it happened under Dr. Mitchell. And let's remember, Gary was very popular. But when he was overthrown, over 90% of the people took to the streets and rejoiced. Yeah, because they had enough of Eric Gary. Now we have seen a similar situation where Dr. Mitchell dominated the political landscape of Grenada over almost 40 years. And people are saying, hey, you have done well, but we had enough. Fatigue has stepped in. And, we want to see a change. And that is what is happening. People just want to see change. And we have to adapt to that change. Otherwise, we will suffer the consequences if we do not respond to the wishes of the people that there should be change, notwithstanding the fact that you have done a very good job. And they may want Dr. Mitchell to continue, maybe in another capacity to advise the party or to be an elderly statesman among the party, but they are saying, hey, let us look for younger leadership, new leadership to drive the party forward, especially where you have a re-emerging NDC with youthful leadership, with vim and vigor. You need a party to really compete, to be on par. And that's what most people are saying. Yes, we need Dr. Mitchell around, but let us look at the way forward in terms of new leadership for the party.
Either of you can respond to this. Are we looking at change for change's sake? You've been around long enough to go, or is it a diminishing capacity to lead in the current era? And whether we look at the NNP or we look at the St. Vincent example where Dr. Gonzalez have reeled off 5 in a row, when we call for change, why are we calling for change?
That's a very good question, Colin. People who want change sometimes, as I said, because, hey, I'm tired with you. There's fatigue has stepped in. Yeah? Something new has emerged. Let us see what that one has to offer. And that is why some people decided to go along with the NDC. Yeah? Not that because the NNP did not do well. They did well, but as I said, once fatigue has stepped in, it is very difficult not to accept the fact that this party must restructure itself to fit the new and emerging situation that we are faced with right now, especially the youthful population. They are articulating for change. For reasons some of them don't even understand why, but they want change. And we have to live with that.
Peter?
Yeah, I don't know that it makes a difference. And this is a nuance that I pick up a lot with political parties in the Caribbean. So people will say, whenever they change narrative, and it will come up, after 2 elections, the change narrative comes up. The theory in terms of politics and the way it goes is that essentially political parties win elections, governments lose support. So usually you have an upswing when you win an election as a political party. When you become a government, invariably you lose support after. There are very few political organizations that gain support while in office. And that is a result of our natural inclination. Interestingly enough, Dr. Mitchell is one of those people where he gained support once while he was in office, and he gained more support in the context of a government that we're very happy with. It happened in Dominica twice, where there were 2 upswings on a previous occasion in Dominica situation. But generally speaking, after the first time, you lose support if you look at the way the electoral trends are. And it is a result of the fact that the change narrative grows in terms of its plausibility each time. So from the first time, there's a possibility that people will have change, but they will always say, okay, we will give you another chance because we like the idea of 2 terms. We have this 2-term thing. From the time you have the third election, the change narrative becomes more powerful and it grows in terms of popularity each time. Now, the way of rebuffing it or the response to it is to say, yeah, but people want change for the sake of change. But my point is that invariably someone that says that is someone who does not believe that they will politically benefit from the change narrative. Now, I'm saying you can try it. You can convince people, clearly Dr. Gonzalez has convinced people that you shouldn't change for the sake of change. But what I've found in terms of my experience in the region is that after 2 elections, anytime there is not change, it's usually because people have not seen an alternative that they believe they can take a chance on. It takes a while for people to say, well, we will just change just because we need to see something different. But the reality is that it grows and grows. So whenever I hear that argument, I always say, does it really matter? It doesn't matter whether people want change for the sake of change or whether people want change for good reason. The reality is that invariably they will want change. And it is extremely difficult to push back against it anytime the conversation comes up because it is a natural inclination. And, I try to imagine a situation in which Dr. Gonzalez will now fight a 6th term. For a 6th consecutive term. And we'll have to convince people that, change is not a good idea because you're changing for the sake of change. And I think that you could probably pull that off in COVID, but I am inclined to think that it's a hard sell in normal circumstances to say to someone, I've been Prime Minister for 6 years, and, 6 terms, and I believe that I should have another chance because it's change for the sake of change.
If it is true, if I may interrupt you here, if it is true that we typically follow the strong leader, how does one build their political party? How does one enhance the organization and present themselves as a viable alternative if it's not going to be change for change's sake? In other words, and I would argue that we saw the examples in Grenada, even if they were getting Dr. Mitchell fatigue, if there wasn't a viable alternative, 15 Love, and we saw that on several occasions. And look at the swing in the 2022 elections from 15 Love to the NNP being in opposition. So is it also necessary for a viable opposition to present themselves and not just, let's say, the 2-term type of scenario?
Yeah. No, I think it has a lot to do with people saying they will give leaders a chance. Grenadians gave Tillman Thomas a chance and regretted it. Guyanese gave Brigadier Granger a chance as well because I think that they were exhausted of the other alternative. And in the case of Barbados, we gave Prendell Stewart a chance. The reason I mention these 3 political characters is simply because they are all very similar in terms of their approach to politics. Nice guys, but clearly not ready for the hurly-burly of political activism. But I think that people will give leaders like that a chance. And the way that you build your brand is to, when you see an opening, and you have that opening for whatever reason, then you lead, and you lead competently, and you lead with some level of vigor. Tillman Thomas made too many unforced errors. The party fell apart, and in no time at all, everyone saw what they expected, which is that the party would fall apart. The point that I keep making to people now is that I think there is a reasonable expectation in some quarters that Dick Mitchell will do the same thing, in that he's clearly not a natural leader. He wasn't in politics for that long, and I think that Grenadians gave him a chance. The idea that he will say, okay, I've got this chance, and I will go back to being my old self and not lead well, I don't think it's a chance that you can take, because I think it's a different conversation that people are having now. And I think that they have responded far better to Dick Mitchell, and there's still a feeling, look, we will give you a chance. How do you come to that? You have to come to that in a situation where, as a political entity, you acknowledge the reason that you've been defeated. You acknowledge that, there's a level of exhaustion, and you say, well, look, let's put forward an alternative. And, my feeling is that the NDC could have saved themselves the last time they were in office when they saw that things weren't going well under Tillman Thomas. And, you change gears. I think that in Grenada, the APNU, I believe that's what they were called at the time, which is ultimately the PNC, could have saved itself when they realized that things were going off the rails by saying, look, let's identify a leader that has a bit more oomph and let's see if we can put that person and see if they can dig us out of the doldrums. But invariably, the political parties, what they do is that they say, look, this is my leader, and that is it. You got to accept that. We are living in a world where people don't have to accept it. And Grenadians have what is an alternative that seems quite reasonable. And, I think that unless things fall apart terribly, they will probably give Dick Mitchell the chance that they never gave Tillman Thomas, to essentially say, well, let me have at least 2 terms, and then after that, then he will have to fight a slightly different battle. But to me, if you want to respond to that, you got to come better. And I don't get the impression that the NMP now is behaving as though it understands why it didn't win the last election. Oh. And I think if it did, it would be in a better position to win the next election.
All right. We'll get into that. It's time for our first break, but we certainly will get into what the lessons learned or not learned from the defeat. We'll be right back.
A call to protect our children. Innocent lives brought into this world. Fruits of the womb, boys and girls. Young lives born into families, longing to be loved and protected by society. Meanwhile, there are persons who are focused on abusing children, ravaging their innocence, pretending to be their friend, appearing to be genuine and a source of protection. They are the same ones who are armed with deception. These wolves in sheep clothing must be exposed. A lot are walking around and nobody knows. It's about time that these abusers feel uncomfortable in society, for the things they do to children is a disgrace to humanity. Our children's cry of no, help, seems to fall on deaf ears. Abusers still ravage them despite the painful tears. There are children who have been abused for many years by people they know. It's like no one cares. Can we not hear the screams of our children as predators continue to use and abuse them? So many died, gone too soon, should have been here to glow and bloom. Together, let's stamp abuse out of this land. As a united force, yes, we can. Wipe away the tears from our children's eyes as we create a society that is free to thrive. I call on all of society. Let us take a stand, for the power of change is in our hands. Make abuse of children a thing of the past, a society where children are free at last.
Boy, yo, they gonna fly with kite now. The wind picking up. I'm coming. Karim, what you doing? Fly my kite. Yeah, but not here. You can't fly kite near power lines, boy. Why not? The wind good. Because mommy say kite threads conduct electricity. Yeah, kite. It's right. If your kite gets stuck in power lines, it can cause power outages, or even worse, it can get shocked. Come, let's go and fly them in the pasture. Yeah, that makes sense.
Grenlink, energizing our Grenada.
For when you need someone to help you to your feet, I'll be that beacon to your highest peak. I'll be right next to you, no, I will never leave. Come on, take my hands, we got everything we need. Cause you can look to me whenever you're in need. Just call on me and I'll be on my way. I'll be by your side, never to divide, the light that shines our way. Wherever your road leads, we'll be right there with you. Wherever your road leads, we'll make your dreams come true. Next side, next side, next side, next to you.
Lexa Credit Union, with you wherever your road leads.
Welcome back, viewers and listeners. We're discussing politics in Grenada, zooming in on the new national party, its health and readiness for governance. We have with us Mr. Anthony Boatswain and Mr. Peter Wickham. Tony, just before we left off, Peter was speaking of whether political parties choose to double down, as it were, on a leader who has been there for quite some time, or they should make adjustments. In your perspective, was it Dr. Mitchell fatigue responsible for the last loss by the NNP?
Well, I will say political fatigue, well, NNP fatigue. And if Dr. Mitchell is the leader of the party, then I think he must take the lion's share of the blame in terms of the fatigue. But we have to look at political organizations like a product, right? Product goes through what you call the life cycle. The beginning, the birth, then you have the time when you experience exponential growth, then you would reach a plateau, and then you might either move down or upwards depending on what strategy you adopt. And unless you decide to rebrand, you will realize that once you reach the plateau, the next step might be downwards. But if you rebrand, then it could be that you can move upwards. It's like a product. Most products, when people tend to get tired of them, you will see that the company will go undertake massive rebranding. They change the advertising strategy. They change the whatever to make the product look new.
So you're suggesting that there's a time for the packaging, as it were, of the NNP to change?
It's time for rebranding of the NNP. The NDC experienced a rebranding by bringing in new leadership, youthful leadership. And I believe the NNP did not take the NDC seriously. Well, the group of young people, that was rebranding. And with the NNP did not see it that way. They felt that, okay, we have something old, people get accustomed to it, so they will continue with it. And that was a serious mistake we made. There was no rebranding, no effort to rebrand the NNP to meet the challenges of this new generation.
Okay.
And unless that is done now, NNP will suffer seriously again at the upcoming polls.
Let me ask you this, just in keeping with the whole idea of rebranding. If you are to influence a voter today to vote for the NNP, without mentioning the name Dr. Mitchell, what are some of the things that you would speak to that they can look forward to, and therefore the NNP become a deserving political party to support?
That one is that's a tricky one, Colin. Because as I said in the past, NNP revolved around Dr. Mitchell. Let us not lose sight of that. Without Kit Mitchell, I don't think there would have been an NNP. And that was the danger with NNP. They never cultivated alternative leadership. So in the event that Dr. Mitchell is no longer there, the party will remain strong. If Dr. Mitchell is out now, I am not saying that the party will be destroyed, but it will be severely weakened because of that over-reliance on that ultimate leader. Mm-hmm. And that syndrome. And believe it or not, NNP is the Mitchell's party. And it's unfortunate it happened that way, because there's an old saying that he who pays the piper calls the tune. Yeah? So whatever is happening in NNP right now, it revolves around Dr. Mitchell, because he owns, well, say that without any apology, Dr. Mitchell owns NNP. When I was treasurer of the new national party, on several occasions, I told the membership, we have to diversify the financing base of the NNP. because 90% of the financing of the party was done by Dr. Mitchell. Yeah? No one wanted to take on the added responsibility to find new avenues of raising revenue. They all relied on him. So now, there is this pressure for Dr. Mitchell to demit or to leave office. But if I own something, I consider it mine, I spend money on it, you cannot just tell me to leave like that. It will not happen. And if it happens, if there is supposed to be, if there is new leadership, if new leadership is to emerge within the NNP, that person must get the blessing of Dr. Mitchell. There's no doubt about that. It's unfortunate it has to go that way because of that over-reliance on him. NNP has no convention in 2 years. You think the executive could say, well, we could call convention without Dr. Mitchell giving the okay to call a convention? So when the general secretary of the NNP and the chairman of the party come and say, well, okay, the executive has to call the election, that is hogwash, total hogwash. Without Dr. Mitchell giving consent, there will be no convention. And without Dr. Mitchell anointing a leader, NNP will not go forward as a united party. They have to take that into consideration. And that could spell disaster. The question is, what is Dr. Mitchell's position in going forward? And that is where I think NNP supporters are a bit worried. Is Dr. Mitchell playing what you call a game with the party in the sense that, okay, he said that he was not running again, that's to the last. But yet no one is seeing that evidence that Dr. Mitchell is ready to step down. So where is that party going? And the longer the party remains in that state of limbo, the more difficult it will be to be prepared to be ready for the next general election. So when people are calling for democratization within the NNP, democratization how? How will you go about doing it? When you have a party owned by the leader, and I say that without any apology, NNP is owned by Dr. Mitchell.
Can we get Peter? Finish the thought.
If Dr. Mitchell said, hey, I'm not supporting you, you will have a hard time.
But Tony, you're not wrong. But the point is that I don't know that the Barbados Labour Party in Barbados is any different, either under Mia Motley or Owen Arthur. I don't know that the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Labour Party, Unity Labour Party, is any different under Dr. Gonzalez, or alternatively Labour in St. Kitts under Dr. Douglas previously. So, to say heavy is the head that wears the crown, and the reality is that all of what you said is true. But that comes with a lot of baggage, because in the same way that your greatness delivers victory after victory, clean sweep after clean sweep for the party, the NNP, your leadership also delivers a stunning loss. And let's be clear, there was really no good reason why that last election should have been lost by the NNP, because Dr. Mitchell lost an election to somebody who was in politics a year. Looking at the thing objectively, there was no good reason why Dr. Mitchell should have won, and he did. And my thing is that against that background, all of this greatness that you're talking about in terms of Dr. Mitchell, I agree with you, but ultimately, now he has to explain why it is that he dragged the organization to the point where it could be beaten by somebody who was in politics for a year. And that is, to me, an important point that has to be made. So I agree with you. The leader is responsible. He almost owns the party. That is a Caribbean phenomenon in terms of fundraising. That's exactly how it works. But you have some interesting examples. You have one in St. Kitts and Nevis, where I think that certainly Dr. Douglas was strong and lorded over the Labour Party in pretty much the same way that Dr. Mitchell did. And he went kicking and screaming and bawling and shouting. He went back and he lost the second election. And it was at that point in time that the Labour Party said, look, we need to do something. And they brought this young guy, Terence through. And he won the last election relatively handily. What has happened now that he's won the election, the money has followed. In Barbados, there was the same thing with Owen Arthur, and he was he was supportive of Mia Mottley, but when he realized that she could challenge him, he turned on her, and he was angry and he was vicious. And again, you lose 2 elections, and then the party said, look, we need to do something, and they made a change. So my sense is that it is entirely possible that the NNP wants to be beaten the second time before it is convinced that it needs to do something. And, we're having these conversations about, whether or not they should do. Look, we all know what happened. We understand what happened, and we also understand what is happening now. And Dr. Mitchell he's behaving exactly like Dr. Douglas behaved. He's behaving exactly like Owen Arthur behaved. He's behaving exactly like this guy in Jamaica that died, Eddie Siaga, the way that he behaved. And, it is a cycle, I realize, where ultimately when you are beaten enough, you will be convinced that, look, it's time to go. And it is tragic. But yeah, great leaders can make parties great. Great leaders can also drag organizations down with them. And that's the nature of politics. It is something that I really wonder why, with all of this science and knowledge that we have of public opinion and how it works and whatnot, that we have to have these conversations over and over again. The NNP is Dr. Mitchell. I agree with that entirely. But the point is that if another leader emerged that was great within the NNP will become that person as well. Right now the NDC is Dicker Mitchell. And I imagine that it was him that would have raised most of the money in the last election, and certainly most of the money will follow him now. And, that's part of the cycle. So I do agree that is ultimately how it works, but it comes with considerable baggage.
And let me ask you this, Peter. So are you saying historically it takes 2 defeats of an old stalwart to give up? And it also takes equity and investment if one is to become, as it were, the political party. And are we walking, from your estimation, walking that very same road here in Grenada? So Dr. Mitchell is going to be around for a second defeat. And if there is a second defeat, the person coming in better be walking with money, because it is Dr. Mitchell's party.
That's pretty much the case, but it can go further, because we had a situation in Barbados where Arabara was beaten twice and still came back and won an election on the 3rd time, and he won it with a landslide, but he won it in a landslide simply because Tom Adams died. So maybe 3 defeats might be necessary, I don't know, but yeah, it is interesting. And what's also interesting is that when Arabara won the election in '86 and came back, the presumption it was Arabara and it was time to finish. He died, and ultimately it finished off the Democratic Labour Party that hasn't really recovered since. So in a sense, I think that the victory of the NNP in the election where they lost and then they came back and they won so resoundingly, in a sense, it sent a signal that, clearly Dr. Mitchell had more life in him and people were still looking to go forward with him and whatnot. And people forgot all of the issues that brought them to the point where they were able to elect Tillman Thomas in the first place. I worry that we don't properly analyze these defeats, and we don't properly understand what is going on, and there's this feeling that you can reverse these things in time. But I am entirely convinced that this is a cycle, and as you said, it may take 2. The reality is it may take 3. And in the meantime, the NNP will suffer. Grenada is interesting in that you're looking at 15 seats. The level of disequilibrium between seats in Grenada is one of the largest I've ever seen in the Caribbean in terms of the sizes comparatively of individual constituencies. Right. That has also created a situation where there is a disproportionate effect in some instances where the NNP appears to be able to remain in office by virtue of the fact that it has critical constituencies where you can win those, and then the other ones are small enough that it becomes less important. That's an electoral issue that you guys will have to address sooner rather than later, because the level of inequity is inconsistent with your constitution and electoral laws, so they should be equitable. And I think that if you had that equity, it may make a more level playing field for both political parties. But my sense is that Dickie Mitchell is not going to want to risk that on his first term. And maybe that electoral reform will come later. And then, yeah, it does present the possibility for another defeat in the same format currently. Or alternatively with a new format.
I certainly would want to have a discussion on that later on, and if we probably zoom in on the St. David seat and probably St. George's South, two of the seats I suspect, Peter, you are referring to, and just in terms of the size, it seems to make sense from a democratic standpoint that we take a close look as to whether or not those should remain as is, and when is the right timing for a political party to do so. But let's just keep on the NNP and its current position. From your information or guesstimation, Tony, is there an undeclared war between Dr. Mitchell and Peter David?
No, I will not call it an undeclared war. This is a democracy, notwithstanding the fact that, as I said, Dr. Mitchell owns NNP, but still, members of the party have a right to present themselves for leadership if Dr. Mitchell decides that he's not running again. And I think this is the big dilemma facing the NNP. What is Dr. Mitchell's position with regards to contesting future elections? And that is not being made clear. And I think it's unfortunate that the party is being held in limbo because the political leader will not declare his intention. He said he's not running again, but yet I get the feeling that he's opposed to any kind of challenge. And I can't understand that. I believe that if Dr. Mitchell decides today that, listen, I said before I was not running again, but when I look at the situation, I've changed my mind. I believe the party will rally around him again. But whether they will win is a different story, because I said that fatigue, that NNP fatigue is still there. Yeah? But it is not being made clear, and there are two schools of thought as to why Dr. Mitchell is behaving that way. One school is that Dr. Mitchell wants to run, but he will not be cleared. He's hoping that there will be a convention where enough delegates there will say, listen, I am voting for Dr. Mitchell to be the political leader, and nomination closed. And Dr. Mitchell will just say, well, listen, I never intend to run again, but if the people want me to run, I will run. That is one school of thought. Another school of thought is that, okay, he may not run again, but he wants to make sure that he puts somebody there. He anoints someone in whom he can place his maximum confidence. Somebody who will be beholden to him. These are strange situations for any political organization, especially for someone who has served the party for almost 38 years. That must be made clear. What is the intention of the leader? No convention in 2 years. What? Well, with COVID
Are you saying NNP? Are you saying, therefore, that Dr. Mitchell is scared of Dr. Mitchell? I'm saying this from the standpoint that Herbert Blaze, from your recount, wasn't aware that he would have been challenged in January of 1989. And he was challenged and beaten by a young, vibrant, articulate Dr. Mitchell, who was doing fantastic work as Minister of Works. Here we have Peter David declaring his candidacy, which is different, who people suspect can be a very good fundraiser. And if we talk about owning the party and putting equity into a party in order for it to be politically viable, Peter David probably can do this. And is it a case where Dr. Mitchell is scared of Dr. Mitchell, not in terms of the name now, but in terms of the opposition and being beaten on the floor of a convention? Hence, there's no motivation to say, let's go to the delegates.
But, Colin, there's a big difference between Dr. Mitchell and Blaze and now Peter and Dr. Mitchell. With Dr. Mitchell and Blaze, I do not believe Blaze expected Kit Mitchell to challenge him at the convention. Yeah, so it came as a surprise to Blaise. But as it stands right now, I think Peter David has made it clear to the party and to Dr. Mitchell that he's interested in the leadership of the party. That I don't think Kit did not make that clear to Blaise. Yeah, so Blaise was in a state of shock. But Kit now is in no shock because Peter has made it clear that he is willing to run, and I see nothing wrong with that. There are many other people within the party, the hierarchy of the New National Party, who are just as capable of taking over the mantle of leadership like Peter David. But the problem is either you open this thing up and say, gentlemen, I am not running again. You feel free to elect someone to take over. I am the elder statesman. I know they will show you all. I know they will show him all the respect due to him as an elder statesman of the party. But I see a kind of hide and seek game being played within the NNP, which doesn't augur well for the rank and file membership. They need to know where they're going because right now, I can tell you on the ground, there's a split. There are people who are saying that, hey, if there's a convention tomorrow, I'm going to vote for Peter David to be leader. Others are saying that, okay, I will vote for maybe Emlyn Pierre, and I will vote for somebody anointed by Dr. Mitchell. I don't think that it should be going.
Yeah, but Tony, it ever occurred to you that Dr. Mitchell doesn't know whether he wants to run again or not? And I think a big part of the reason why he doesn't know whether he wants to run again or not is because there are all of these dynamics happening. So there's a set of people in Dr. Mitchell's ear telling him, Doc, you are the person to lead the party. You've been the most successful leader in Grenada and one of the most successful in the region. You can do this again. You just need to hunker down or whatnot. Many of these people owe their existence politically or their existence economically to Dr. Mitchell. And as a result, they whisper these things in his ear. And I mean, one of the things with politics I always find fascinating is that people will tell politicians and leaders a lot of things, and after a while they begin to believe it. And, ultimately, when you're hearing this all the time, it sounds sweet. I mean, who does not like to be flattered? Let's face it. So you have that conversation going on, and then you have another conversation going on by another set of people in the party that will say, boy, I feel that you might be tired, but I don't like the alternatives. And that's the conversation that I have a lot of time for, where people say, I would be willing to throw Dr. Mitchell overboard if you can give me an alternative that fills my eyes in the same way. So in other words, you want to go down here. You want somebody who sounds like Dr. Mitchell, but is somebody new.
And is it somebody new, or is it a challenge with former NDC operators like Peter David and others who came into the party? Is the opposition that they're not one of us, and how can they be now at the helm?
Unfortunately, I do not believe, and in all fairness, I do not believe Peter David is challenging. Peter David has made it clear that if there is a vacancy, if Dr. Mitchell is not going forward, he will be interested. That is not a challenge. A challenge is, okay, if Dr. Mitchell is going forward and Peter David decide, okay, I want to go forward as well, then I'll challenge. But that has not, Peter David has never said, if Mitchell is going forward, I am challenging for leadership. And I've heard it from some other aspirants to the party, leadership of the party, that if there's a vacancy, I will be presenting myself as a future leader. So no one is really challenging Dr. Mitchell as yet.
I know Mrs. Perez said so. I don't know that Mr. David said that if there is a vacancy, that will be the only time he will put himself forward. But Peter, you wanted to make a point. Right. Go ahead.
No, I'm saying that there are a range of reasons why leaders determine that alternatives are not appropriate. So you could come from the wrong party, you could come from the wrong background, you could go to the wrong high school. Maybe the person is the wrong color, the too short, the too tall. There were times when Mia Motley's gender was the reason why she should be prime minister, and there were other times when it was the reason why she shouldn't become prime minister. There was talk about her background being a good reason why she should, because she comes from a long political line, and then there were times that people said that's the reason why she shouldn't. So this idea that Peter David's, the albatross around his neck is the fact that he's NDC is just one of many reasons why. Because there's a lady who is also expressed an interest if it is that the leader decides he's not interested. And, again, she is going to come up against persons that will say we're ready for a woman. And she's going to come up against persons that will say, no, a woman could never leave this country. So ultimately, the issue really is not the alternative. The issue is whether or not the incumbent is prepared to say, look, I'm going to leave off. And I agree with Tony entirely. I've always heard Peter David say, if there's a vacancy, I'm interested. And I do agree that there are a whole lot of other people who may put up their hand and say they're interested in coming again if there is a vacancy. And my feeling is that there are a number of good leaders potentially in Grenada that have not said anything simply because they know very well that Dr. Mission ain't going anywhere. And in a situation where you're not convinced he's going, why would you go forward? And I mean, I would say this to anyone who is saying, oh, I'm coming into an MP now with the expectation that I can contest leadership. You need to pause and stick a pin because, there will be many people who would have come. And I saw it in the Barbados Labour Party. There's a gentleman now who is president of the Senate. He was the heir apparent. There was Clyde Maskell, he was the heir apparent, and MBA was the heir apparent. There are always a slew of people who think that they are coming in to be groomed for the post of leader until such time as the leader decides, I don't think that you're right because, you have the wrong, you wear blue shirts and I prefer people that wear green shirts, or you're the wrong height. We prefer taller leaders. There's always these kinds of conversations, but the fundamental issue really is the incumbent willing to create a vacancy? And I feel that that's what a lot of the conversation should be about. The expectation that the incumbent feels it's a good idea to create a vacancy. And then let's see who is out there that's interested in leadership, that may want to go forward.
Thank you very much, Peter. And viewers, it is time for our second break. So we'll take the break. And when we come back, you certainly can weigh in on the political situation in Grenada, zooming in on the health and readiness for governance of the new National Party. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for a reliable, affordable, and customer-friendly pharmacy? Look no further than Hills and Valley Pharmacy, the nation's leading healthcare products and services provider. We are committed to serving you at convenient locations. Find an extensive and affordable selection of prescription and over-the-counter drugs and medical supplies at Church Street, Hillsborough, Carriacou, Jubilee Street, Grenville, St. Andrew, near the bus terminal, and Halifax and Grenville Street, St. George. Our committed team is always available to offer valuable assistance for managing your health and wellness. Discover the additional benefits of our wholesale distribution on Halifax Street and our Medcare Center on Grenville Street, where we provide in-house physiotherapy, massage therapy, doctor consultations, and eye care services. Our commitment is to satisfy all your healthcare needs, including competitive prices, loyalty rewards, and special discounts for seniors. Contact us at 435-6904 and WhatsApp 535-4734. Choose Hills and Valley Pharmacy. Remember, your health is our business.
Natural disaster can change your life in minutes. Preparation is the best protection for your family and business. Prepare now. Create a disaster plan and make sure everyone knows what to do. Store water, non-perishable food, and medication. Remember basic emergency supplies such as batteries and flashlights. Trim overhanging trees. If trees near power lines are unsafe to trim, call Grenlec at 237 for assistance or advice. Install surge protectors to safeguard your electrical devices against outages and intermittent surges. Make sure your generator has an isolation switch. It will prevent power from feeding to our lines and electrocuting others. For more information, visit grenlec.com.
Grenlec, energizing our Grenada.
Welcome back. We're talking politics in Grenada, looking at the new National Party. With me, Mr. Anthony Boatswain and Mr. Peter Wickham. You certainly can weigh in and share your opinions. 440-1252, that's the number. And we do have our first caller online. Good evening, caller, and welcome.
Yes, good evening to you, and
yes.
good evening to your guest. Now, I listened to this debate, and what is going through my mind, I believe, I heard Dr. Mitchell said that he's not going to run again. This was his last term would be the last. But I think there is a degree of hostility which started then. And before he definitively says, look, this is my day or this is my year, apparently he's pushed. And he's taking this as disrespect. And so until that disrespect goes away, he's not going to concede. He's just going to wait at the last moment and then just say, well, okay, that's it. So I think he's doing that deliberately because of the disrespect, I believe. And I'm picking up certain things too that is meted out to him at this point in time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Your thoughts in leaving on his own terms, as it were. Yes, he would have made a declaration, but he's not going to be forced out. Your thoughts?
Peter.
No, this is exactly what Dr. Douglas said in St. Kitts and Nevis when he was challenged by Dr. Drew. He said that, it's disrespectful, that leaders of parties that have been as successful as he should not be challenged. And he stood down because he says that he will not be challenged and beaten in a leadership race. And that's how it was before, and that's how it would be him. So if this is the case, I would not be surprised that Dr. Mitchell also feels it is disrespectful. Indeed, he probably thinks it's disrespectful for Tony to be speaking in the way that he's been speaking now, bearing in mind the close proximity that they have been in the past. So yeah, I fully expect that is it. I disagree, however, that it's disrespectful. I think that it is entirely respectful of, and I think that whenever we speak of Dr. Mitchell, we have to place the context of a man that has done great things both in Grenada and regionally, a man who is part of the history of Caribbean politics, and a man who has achieved things that no other leader in the Caribbean has achieved. There's no reason why there has to be disrespect, but I do feel that there is a perception in that regard, yes.
Okay. Tony?
I beg to differ. I do not detect any level of disrespect being meted out to Dr. Mitchell by anyone who is aspiring to leadership of the party. Because everyone so far, well, the two persons who have indicated an interest, made it absolutely clear that they are interested only if there's a vacancy, if Dr. Mitchell is not running again. No one has challenged Dr. Mitchell's leadership, especially if he has indicated that he will be running again. I'm pretty sure if Dr. Mitchell was to come out tomorrow and say, listen, I changed my mind, I am having second thought. I thought I was going to win the last election and then step out and walk to the sunset in glory. But I lost the election. It was a bit embarrassing. And I want to redeem myself, so I will run again. I believe the party will rally around him. I mean, let's be honest about that. No one has challenged. As far as I know, Peter David will not challenge, because Peter David knows his past history. I mean, people also accuse him of breaking up parties in the past, so he will not do that. He's timid with regards to challenging. So he will wait for Dr. Mitchell to declare, and Dr. Mitchell has indicated that he's not running again. And if you are not running again, what is wrong with anybody? It doesn't have to be Peter David, it doesn't have to be Emlyn Clare, it could be any one of them saying, listen, you're not running again, I am interested in leadership. Why you should be hostile to anyone who is making such a proclamation?
Right.
And that's my concern with the NNP moving forward. I think that could be their demise in the future.
I'm going to ask both of you from your experiences, if you are to identify 3 potential leaders within the NNP to succeed Dr. Mitchell, who would be the 3 persons that you will think of? I mean, you know, they can want to offer themselves or not. They could have declared or not. That's what I'm going. Just asking, just from your, interactions, observations of the party, who would be 3 that you will think of? We can give you first, Tony, as a 25-plus year member of the party, and as a Peter.
Colin, as it stands right now, I want to be honest with you. I will not handpick any 3 persons to say, well, that 3 persons I feel could take over leadership. I believe, when I look at the leadership of the NNP, when I look at the executive, when I look at the members in parliament right now, I believe any one of them is capable of leading NNP. And even outside of the party, supporters who are not within the executive or within the rank and file of the party right now, I believe there are people out there who can also qualify. So I do not want to say, well, I pick this one and pick this one. I believe that should be done in an orderly fashion in a convention of the party. And whoever emerges, that's it. But Dr. Mitchell should not be saying, okay, I anoint X or I anoint Y. That is not democracy. Yeah? Let democracy reign. But if you are not voting again, say, gentlemen, I'm not voting again. It is open, and may the best man win in a free and fair election at the convention. But I will not, as it stands right now. I know they're all capable. Being honest with you, they are all capable of leading the new national party, and therefore I will not want to finger out 1, 2, or 3.
Just before I go to Peter,
I like Tony's response, and I would support it entirely, because we get into this thing about conversations about alternatives, and the conversation shouldn't be about the alternative. We're talking about whether it is time for the incumbent to step aside. I don't feel that we do ourselves any favor by saying that there needs to be an alternative, and that is a different conversation.
But no, but it must be, no, Peter, forgive me if I have a difficulty in accepting that, because when we say it's time for the survival of the party and for democracy overall in Grenada, there must be a successor. And the question is whether or not the party as an institution has been and should be grooming leaders to take over, or whether the current leader has a responsibility to identify someone, they may be voted for on the floor or not, but identify someone who can step forward.
Because that's not, to me, that is not a relevant conversation. Our political system is not one in which we groom leaders. That is the decision in terms of who leads the party is for the party to make at a point in time. It's not for a leader to decide who he's going to handpick to succeed in. And if you look at the United Kingdom, look, the Labour Party, the Conservative Party changed 3 leaders in the space of 3 or 4 years. And what happens? They have a situation where the leader says, I am giving up the post. And essentially, there's a process within the organization where they say, okay, let us look at who puts up their hand and is interested, and we will choose from among those persons. To me, that is the way modern political parties operate. But to have a conversation where we say we will only discuss Dr. Mitchell's departure when there is a person that fills our eyes, and this is a totally different. It's not a competition between those two. The question is the person currently leading in a position to continue to deliver? Have people grown tired of that person? And if that is the case, then that person has to make a decision that they will write off or write out into the sunset. And then once that vacancy is created, then there's time for all of that. And I think that Tony is spot on in that regard. We can't have a conversation in which we predicate this whole question of where is the NNP going under Dr. Mitchell with a conversation about who is there to succeed that person. The Westminster system is not one in which you groom anyone. The Westminster system is one in which you have a leader. The leader is like a king. When that person essentially falls from grace, you replace them. That's the way that it works in our system.
And the question is, should it be? Does Grenada deserve, and the political parties, whether it's NNP, NDC, MBPM, whoever it is, those organizations deserve a structure, and the people of Grenada deserves a structure where that is futuristic in terms of its planning, in terms for leadership, because we have small resources. We are 112,000 people. Can we afford to wait until an individual decides it's time for me to step away, for us to begin the search? Or should we be grooming individuals to take on leadership positions within the organizations?
I would answer that question in this way. Can you tell me the Caribbean island, which is similar in size to Grenada, where a leader has been groomed, a successor has been groomed, and that person has been prepared for office and is step aside? Which country has that happened? If you can tell me where that has happened, then I will say it's not a question of whether Grenada deserves it or not, because I think that all of the islands are in pretty much the same way. The reality is that we do not have a political system that facilitates that type of thing. It has not been our tradition in the Caribbean, and I challenge you to identify the country in which that has happened. So it's not as though Grenadians are being ill-treated or treated any worse than anybody else. It is that we have all inherited political systems in which that's not our practice. And I challenge you to identify the island in which it has worked differently. Is it not Dominica? Is it Barbados? Is it St. Lucia? St. Vincent and the Grenadines, even Montserrat, it just does not happen that way, unless I miss something,
Happens that way because we could maintain the same old. The question is whether we deserve a change.
But if you deserve a change, you would change it. I'm talking about if you deserve a change in leader, you would make that change. And to be honest, I think that's essentially what Grenadians have determined, that they want to change, and they've made that change. Okay. It's now a question of whether the Grenadians feel that they deserve a change back, and then, whether the NNP will want to facilitate it or not.
Okay. We have a caller online. Good evening, caller, and welcome. Good evening, caller. There seem to be some connectivity issues there. Tony, you're making a contribution.
No, I'm agreeing with Peter in this regard. This thing about the leader grooming someone to take over, that's not on. It's not part of our democracy. It's not something that we should really embrace. A leader, NNP been in existence for since 1984. You talk about 40 years. And at this time now, we are talking about a party that cannot, having difficulty having someone emerge as leader who could be voted for in a convention, in a free and fair process. Something that will be fundamentally wrong. And I don't think we should change it and have a leader endorse or anoint. Dr. Mitchell is not running a stable, so you don't have to groom anybody.
All right. We have a caller online. Let's take the caller and come back. Good evening, caller.
Hello, good evening. I want to make a contribution very simple and easy. In light of the NNP, the fact remains that now, if you look at the story with Farrell, what was the end of Farrell? He was a strong leader. He was a strong leader, yes, but in what direction and what was the end of him? So then we got to look at it in that direction the same way as, who with any intelligence basically want to be successful to the end will create their own demise. And this is what is happening with the NNP and Dr. Mitchell. Thank you.
All righty. You heard the comment, and I certainly would want you to respond to the comment. And Tony, my question or comment earlier was not one of an anointment of an individual, but whether the organization should be grooming leaders. But do leaders create their own demise? I think is a comment made by the caller.
Yeah, the organization, per se. Which is different from a political leader. Yeah, within the party structure, you can have people who could be identified as potential leaders. Yeah, and they could be nurtured or channeled in that particular direction. But to have a leader decide, listen, I'm not running again, but I want this person, or I'm anointing that person to run, is a no-no. And it should never be accepted at any level in any party. You don't have to be NNP, any political party. That should be a no-no.
Okay, we have another caller online. Good evening, caller, and welcome.
Hi, good evening. Good evening, panelists. Good evening, Colin.
Evening.
Good evening, Peter. Good evening, Mr. Boatswain. Peter asked a very important question. Which Caribbean island we saw the leader stepping aside and allowing somebody to take over? In the case of St. Lucia, Dr. Kenny Anthony stepped aside and allowed Mr. Philip J. Pierre to come to the fore, and he's Prime Minister today. How does he view that?
Peter,
Dr. Anthony was beaten to the best of my knowledge. Dr. Anthony was beaten to the best of my knowledge, and I think Dr. Anthony was beaten twice, if you recall. And I did say earlier that the question is the ability of a person to be beaten twice. So I think that after losing 2 elections, although in his case it wasn't consecutive, that may have made a huge difference. But and no, I don't know that changes my view on anything. I think that he was persuaded that he would need to do that and give his deputy leader the opportunity to come to the fore. But it wasn't a situation where he said, okay, well, I've been leader for long enough, let me step aside and allow him to emerge. My understanding is that he has now indicated that he is not coming back again. Good for him that he's made that decision. But I can't say that it has been an exception to the rule. The American system is one in which leaders are groomed because vice presidents invariably have the option of running for president if they so desire, and many of them do, and some of them have succeeded and become good leaders. However, the American system is a reaction to the Westminster system. It is not a carbon copy of the Westminster system. And one of the critical features of the Westminster system is that we really don't do the deputy thing. In many of the Caribbean islands, they don't even have a post of deputy prime minister. It is not in our constitution that you need to have a deputy prime minister. And many leaders don't bother. And then the irony is that in the United Kingdom, the person who is likely to succeed as leader is generally not the deputy prime minister. And in most of their instances, the deputy never really emerged. So Philip J. Pierre was deputy and he's emerged, and congratulations to him. But it is an extremely unusual phenomenon. Mia Motley was also a deputy and she has emerged. But generally speaking, the people who have succeeded in defeating and taking over from leaders are usually not the deputy, because that's not the way that our system works.
Yeah, and if I'm just to ask, and this is, you can answer this from knowledge or from experience or guessing, but have we been identifying deputy leaders who are friendly to us as opposed to other strong leaders within the party? And that is why when you step aside, it's not your deputy that is stepping up.
Because why would you get somebody to mind the shop that can thief the goods? You don't do that. If you want someone to mind the shop, you would normally have someone minding the shop that is going to be honest or faithful and whatnot. I remember Friend Stewart put it well. He said, you don't go in a man's house and change the curtains and whatnot like that. You would normally observe the fact that everything that he has in place, would want to remain in place. Acting Prime Minister is a very, very powerful post, because as an acting prime minister, you ultimately have all the powers that the real prime minister has. So for that reason, prime ministers tend not to give it to a person who will look too comfortable in the house or the car and, that kind of thing. You give it to a person who is a nice person, competent, but not someone who will thief the goods in the shop. So that's my take on that.
If I'm to just look in terms of Caribbean politics and the anointment issue, have we seen that failed attempt in St. Vincent, where it is alleged that Dr. Gonzalez identified his son as his successor, and there was such great resistance that he remains as leader of the party. Is that assessment true?
No, Dr. Gonzalez, in fairness, has identified 2 people. His son is one of them, but Sabota Caesar is also one of them that have been identified. And if you look at their marketing in the last election, there were both pictures that were presented as alternatives, and Dr. Gonzalez, yes, has openly said that he is comfortable with either of the two. As to who he prefers, we can all speculate. As to who the people prefer, again, we can all speculate. But I think he is more or less narrowed it down to two people, and I think that is consistent with what the public of St. Vincent wants to see. But to go beyond that and to say that he actually chose one person, I don't believe that is, that is the case. The interesting thing for me is that historically, we had the Manley father-son team, we had the Bird father-son team. We had the Adams father-son team, and one wonders whether he may try to do a quadruple, by having the Gonzalez father-son team. And interestingly enough, that with all of those, we have an airport. So we have the Manley airport, we have the Adams airport, we have the Bird airport. And we now have an airport in St. Vincent and Grenadines that for the time being has the name Argyle International Airport. And one wonders whether, the 4P may very well present itself. But that is all in the realm of speculation. But I don't know that he has chosen anyone. But I know that they've been, he has indicated that there are two people. And I can't say who will emerge ultimately, who the people want and who he would prefer.
Okay. It's almost time for us to wrap up. So, Tony, I'm going to start off with you. As you speak to the NNP supporter, what would be your advice so that NNP can be strengthened and, of course, Grenada politics as a result, likewise strengthened?
My advice to the NNP supporters, and again, I said I'm not speaking on behalf of the New National Party. I'm speaking as an independent person looking at the politics, from my own vantage point. I feel a bit sorry for the supporters of the New National Party right now, because to me they are trapped between a rock and a hard place, in the sense of that they do not know exactly in what direction the party will be going in terms of the leadership, who will be leading the party in the upcoming election. And I think this is unfortunate because, as I said, you have a leader who has been there for 40 years. Nothing wrong with that leader saying, listen, I'm prepared to run again. I believe he will get the support of a significant number of supporters because he's still very popular. He's still held in high esteem by a large segment of the NNP party. But that is not happening, and I see a hide-and-seek type of activity which is not fair to the members of the party. Right now, the members of the party are at loss. There's no convention. No one knows when a convention will be called. Only the political leader, notwithstanding what the general secretary or the chairman of the party will tell you that the executive will decide, that is hogwash. The political leader will be the one to decide when there will be a convention of the party. And I presume that he's waiting on the opportune time when there might be enough delegates that might be in favor of him returning to power. And I think that is not fair, because right now, as I tell you, on the ground, the party is split. Because there are some people who are saying the party is split in terms of its support, in terms of future leadership, and that will hurt the party big time. NNP is depending on NDC to fail for them to succeed. That's a big mistake. Because NDC, a young, youthful party, no way they will give up what they have right now and go back in the wilderness. They will try hard. And this NNP must realize that their work is cut out for them, and the sooner they get a house in order and build strong pillars, the better will be for them. But as it stands right now, they're in a state of limbo, and that is sad.
Peter, just following up on what Tony just said is that the NNP cannot expect what happened in the 2008-2013 good fortune, as it were, to return to power, and therefore they need to take decisive action. If you are to have a conversation with Dr. Mitchell, what will your advice be using the historical background that you have, political historical background, regionally and otherwise? How would you advise him?
And this, of course, presumes that I have not had the opportunity to have such a conversation with Dr. Mitchell, which I haven't. I want to thank you for the invitation, and I've enjoyed talking NNP politics with the gentleman like Tony, who is so steeped in NNP politics, and it's an opportunity to learn. I am entirely comfortable with his position that says that what the NNP really needs is an opportunity to have a convention in which they decide for themselves, and you know, this whole issue is put to rest once and for all. I entirely agree that the 2008 to 2013 scenario was essentially a question of lightning striking, and I don't know that the lightning will strike twice in the same place. I think that that Dickon Mitchell is definitely not Thurman Thomas. And clearly his time in politics has been already very different to that of Thurman Thomas's. He doesn't have a lot of the baggage of the revolution and that period. He's a very different person, and I think that you really have to carve out opportunities. Government is not going to collapse in the way that it did before and hand back to you. It's going to be a situation in which you have to fight to get it back, and to fight to get it back, you have to be firing on all cylinders. And right now, there's an elephant in the room, and I think that, you know, we can't be uncharitable to Dr. Mitchell, bearing in mind what he has achieved. But I also think that there has to be a realization that, you know, going forward, Grenadians are not likely to be motivated. And I just hope that we don't see the same regional scenario where it will take 2 defeats to, you know, convince the leader that it's time to move on and give politics the opportunity to move in that direction. One of the things that I think is unfortunate in all of this is that in this time, Grenada actually had an opportunity for constitutional change that could have ensured that we would not be having this conversation today. And guess what? A majority of Grenadians overwhelmingly voted against the idea of having term limits. I'm a strong believer in term limits. And if we did have term limits, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. And it was interesting that it was a Keith Mitchell administration that put that on the ballot paper. And a majority of Grenadians opposed it. In what I don't think was the finest hour, to be honest, because ultimately you have given up the opportunity to change your constitution in a way that would have allowed for something which is fundamentally needed in so many Caribbean territories and is fundamentally absent in all of them. The only place where it exists is in Cayman Islands. You know, it's been almost rejected in every other instance, and I was really, really hopeful that Grenada would have taken the opportunity, especially as you guys saw the example of what could happen with winning all the seats so many times, that you would have, you know, blazed a trail. But guess what? It didn't happen. So now we are having a conversation about whether or not an individual who has held the job for as long as Dr. Mitchell has could continue to hold the job for longer. So I wish the NNP well. I wish Grenada well. It's a country I've always loved, and I really do believe that Grenadians have a level of political maturity to sort this out and to move on, because you guys have been through, you know, worse fires before. And they say that the hotter the fire, the more fine the steel that emerges at the end. And I can only say in final comment that I wish the NNP and Grenada well in sorting out this stuff. And I think that it will be sorted out one way or the other, if not in one election, in 2.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peter Wickham. Certainly a regional pollster and political analyst, and I agree with you 100% on the term limits. Along with Mr. Anthony Boatswain, long-standing member of the New National Party, here as independent observer and Grenadian. And to you, our listeners and viewers, a hearty thank you. We certainly appreciate your presence, and we look forward to being with you yet again 6 days, 22.5 hours from now. Take good care. Godspeed.
Yeah.
Okay.